It's already 1 year after the Maidan, and the whole fight in the beginning was very much against the corruption, and it was a lot connected with the assets of the Ukrainian oligarchs kept in Europe, in London. There were the demands. Some assets were freezed of the former Ukrainian government official. You researching to some extent this topic. What do you think? After a year, what are the results? Are there still that asset there? How the whole case of this Ukrainian corrupted government?
To be honest, I think we're almost exactly now in the same position that we were in about April. The assets are still frozen. The sanctions list still exists, but nothing else has happened, essentially. Sadly, the Ukrainian prosecutors have done almost nothing to collect information, to bring criminal charges, to do anything at all to assist the European authorities in returning this money. It's very obvious that the European authorities can't return the money unless it's shown to be criminally acquired. If it's just ordinary legal money, there's nothing they can do about it. That being so, they need some kind of proof, some evidence to justify legally the fact that they're going to take this money away from its owners and return it to the Ukrainian state. That hasn't happened. Nothing's happened at all. The responsibility very much lies on the Ukrainian prosecutors, Ukrainian policemen, and nothing's happening.
Can you explain a bit more? What should be the procedure in order to do something with those assets?
Well, I mean, as with any criminally acquired assets, you cannot just take them away. You can freeze them, but they're still private property. You still need to prove that the money or whatever, houses, cars, yachts, football clubs, are criminally acquired, are bought with criminal money. And once you've done that, you can take them away. But until that happens, obviously, you can't just go around taking houses off people because, where would it end? Obviously. So the responsibility at the moment is, I think the European authorities have, to a certain extent, done something. The Ukrainian authorities haven't done anything.
When we talk about the assets, what kind of assets we talk of? What are the biggest guys there, and where do they have their assets?
Well, I mean, this is very hard to say to a certain extent. We can see where their holding companies are. That doesn't necessarily mean that the assets are there. To a large extent, a lot of the assets are in Ukraine. They just happen to be owned through Europe. So obviously, Mr. Firtash, he owned his assets primarily, via Austria. He is in Austria. That is the only sort of court case that's ongoing. Mr. Ivan Yushchenko owned his assets primarily via London. So did Yanukovych. The others, via Austria, via Cyprus, via Latvia. In terms of where the money is, this is a process that will last for a very long time. But we do know that assets have been frozen in Liechtenstein and in Switzerland, and in London and elsewhere in the EU. So, I mean, that's where that money is. But it's worth remembering that this is a very long process. Ukraine shouldn't count on getting this money anytime soon. If you look at the case of Lazarenko in the 1990s, he was convicted of money laundering and imprisoned in America for 12 years, I think. He didn't serve 12 years, but I think that's what he was convicted for.
It's about a former Ukrainian
Prime Minister, exactly. That money has still not been returned. The money still exists in bank accounts outside Ukraine, with the court case continues to go on, despite the fact that this guy has been jailed, convicted and jailed for the crime that he committed. The money, even though he is proven to be a criminal, has still not been returned. That is how difficult this was, and that was something that happened in the late 1990s. This is going to be a very, very long process, but what really, really needs to happen is that the Ukrainian authorities need to gather the evidence against these people so that the Western law enforcement agencies can get on with their job, which at the moment they're just not able to do.
There is another targeted group, some Russian officials, which in a way connected to the Russian government, which makes some connection with the fight in the east of Ukraine, and What is your assessment of how these sanctions which are there, the EU sanctions against some close circle of Putin, are they working? Do people treat them seriously? I mean, all regarding their business in Europe or their way they can travel to Europe.
Well, I think you need to what the assets are for. The assets aren't intended to punish specific individuals. They're intended to try and dissuade Russia from continuing with the policy that it's been following. And in that regard, I think the sanctions are working exactly as they were intended. They are starving the Russian economy of money. The ruble is having a terrible time. It's hit a new all-time low today. I mean, obviously a lot of that's to do with the oil price, but a lot of that is also to do with money just leaving Russia. In capital flight, supposed to be $118 billion this year, which is, even for Russia, a really colossal sum of money. And in that regard, the sanctions are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, which is squeeze the Russian economy in a slow way, a slow, predictable, dependable way, and hopefully the idea being that Putin will then say, I'm not prepared to inflict that kind of damage on the economy, and he'll rethink and do something else. Sadly, he isn't showing any signs of doing that. So though the sanctions are doing exactly what they're intended to do, they're not having the desired effect. But that's a question of psychology, not a question of economics. The economics are working absolutely fine. In terms of the individuals, yes, some of them aren't able to travel to Europe anymore. Some of them are, however. I mean, we saw Sobyanin was able to go to Paris because he...
He's the mayor of Moscow.
Hang on, did I say Sobyanin?
Yeah.
Yes, he was able to go to... am I thinking of Sobyanin? My mind has gone completely blank. Anyway, he was able to go to Moscow because he could show he was a UN ambassador. He was working at a UN passport, and he was able to go to Paris and, to hold kinds of meetings there. That was fine. Other ones, Timchenko was able to go places because he has a Finnish passport. There are an awful lot of complications, not leaving aside the fact that a lot of assets which are held in foreign countries, particularly, so Vladimir Yakunin's assets are held by his son, and those assets haven't been touched. So the sanctions are effective in terms of on a Russian economy scale. In terms of these individuals, there have been some small effects, but essentially, they've been able to evade them. Or they haven't really. I don't think they haven't had to sell their yachts yet. Put it that way.
Do you think there something else could be done at this point, or there is any intention on that?
I mean, no, I don't think there is any. I don't think there's any desire in the European Union to do anything more at the moment. The European economy is in a bad way. The sort of falling Russian economy is harming particularly the German economy and then the economy in Eastern Europe. Russia has already barred the import of agricultural products from the European Union, which has really harmed the economies in the Baltics, particularly in Poland. So no, I don't think you'll see anything more in terms of these big sectoral sanctions, but I don't think that anything more is necessary. I think what's already been done is a lot. But I don't really think that Ukraine should be relying on these sanctions to get them out of a hole. These sanctions aren't intended to be permanent, and they're not intended particularly to help Ukraine. Ukraine has got enough of its own businesses to worry about without having to worry about whether Yakunin is able to buy a second yacht this year. The stuff that needs to be done here, and that means investigating, gathering information, collecting it, having honest court cases and putting people in jail. That's what needs to be happening here. And what's happening in Russia, people really should leave that to the Russians.
Are you talking about the particular court cases, or exactly of those, still the people from
any court cases? I mean, it would be nice if there were people from the former government or former officials or former businessmen or anyone. Just someone. I mean, there needs to be 10 court cases, maybe 5, a decent number, so the people now will understand that the rules have changed. Because there are endless rumours about how the fact that all the old people are coming out of their holes where they've been hiding, returning to all the old business practices. Bribes are much lower now than they were under Yanukovych, but they'll go back up again just like they did under Yanukovych, and everything will go back to how it was, and that needs to be stopped.
You met a number of Ukrainian investigative journalists. So, what would be your understanding of the situation
in terms of
what has changed? Of course, the corruption is still there. It's the rule of law is not yet there. The court system is definitely not clean. Let's say
the court system is disastrous. What has changed? There's a new parliament, which is good, and it's better than the old one, I think. But that isn't very difficult. It's probably 5 times better than the old one, which is instead of having 10 honest people, it maybe has 50. But that's a start. That's something. There's a president who isn't as grotesquely dishonest as the last president. That's good. These are small things, but it's it is sort of 100 steps forward, 99 steps back. It's really tough because you need really to break. It's not just a question of replacing individuals. You need to change the system. As long as the courts remain dishonest, then there's effectively nothing you can do. And as long as the prosecutors remain dishonest, there's nothing you can do. Someone has to be very bold. I was speaking to a source today who said that if the new government doesn't do anything within 2 weeks, it will never do anything at all. So it's 2 weeks. If you can see, if in 2 weeks' time nothing's been done, nothing's going to happen. And that's pretty worrying.
And when there are these ideas of the lustration and anti-corruption law, I mean, everybody says it's about to implement it, but still, I think would it be more or less the first step, or there should be something else? I
don't know how lustration is possible. Everyone was corrupt. I mean, you can't sack everyone. That wouldn't. It's just. Okay, in Georgia you can because it's a small country and it was kind of ruined anyway. You can't in Ukraine; it's too big. You have to change the systems and then say to people, right, from now on you can't behave that way. And you have to pay people enough money to live on, because if you're paying a doctor €200 a month, then they can't live on that. Obviously, they're going to steal anyway. So I mean, there are so many things that need to be done. I mean, lustration's a lovely idea. But I mean, how do you do it? How can you implement it if the courts are crooked anyway? It's all going to be corrupt because they're going to either lose their job or not lose their job, depending on whether they can pay the court. It's lovely, but I don't really think it's a priority.
Coming back to Europe and to London, there were talks about like the city of London. There are people not really willing to break the connection and their cooperation with Russia. Has anything really changed? In general, because Russia doesn't look that much anymore as a secure place you can have a good business.
I think things have changed. I think there is widespread disquiet over any political party having any connection to Russian officials at all. There have been connections with the Conservative Party in Russia, but every time they do, there is a big press outcry. So, yes, I think people are being much more arm's length than they used to be. I mean, if you just look at the previously George Osborne, who's the finance minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he was happy to go to a party on Oleg Deripaska's yacht, as was Peter Mandelson, who was a Labour politician who was then a European Union commissioner. That wouldn't happen anymore. That's inconceivable. So there has been some movement, but essentially it's an incredibly long way to go. I think one thing that would be absolutely lovely, personally, would be if they made a list of top officials in Ukraine, all the members of parliament, all the ministers, all the deputy ministers, all the regional governors, and they were to give this list to the European Union and say, I want you to pass a law that none of these people are allowed to own assets in the European Union, all their families.
In advance.
Just say, look, all these people by ex officio. So if you are a member of the Ukrainian Parliament, not this individual, this job, you are not allowed, or your family, or your children, are not allowed to own assets in the European Union. And if you don't like it, don't be a member of Parliament. That would be a really good thing to do. That would be imaginative and it would be effective because there would be no incentive to steal.
Is it up to Ukrainians to have this?
Yes.
Yeah, because nobody would else.
Yeah, I mean, because it would be totally unfair if the European Union did it without. I mean, it would be discriminatory. But if the Ukrainians said, look, we would like you to pass this law, because it isn't enough for Ukraine to say it's illegal for you to have assets in Europe if you're a member of Parliament, because the Ukraine will never know because you can hide them in Luxembourg. However, if the European Union says it, I mean, that would be great. It'd be a really good idea. But these kind of things would be so unpopular. I mean, how on earth would you get that past the Ukrainian Parliament? It's impossible. Everyone's got villas in Italy and maisonettes in Paris. It's just not going to happen. But I mean, that would be good. That would be really effective, and it would be imaginative, and it would be a real declaration of intent. But it's not going to happen.
Do you think there is another intention to pass a law which would have we will change the way the political parties are financed, and there is an intention for at least these young politicians who went to parliament to have the state finance of political parties rather than they would be financed by the oligarchs or some rich guys. Do you think it might be a way?
I don't think it would solve anything, would it? I mean, I don't think that would. I mean, maybe it would. I don't think that would solve anything. I think the oligarchs are always going to find a way. When someone is that rich compared to everyone else, they're always going to find a way, aren't they? I mean, look at America. You know, that's got the rule of law and everything, and they found a way. They got the Supreme Court to say you can do what you like and now they can. So, I mean, it's not going to happen.
Anyways, on that, thanks a lot. That would be. There are some creative ideas in that. And
I dream of what I would do if I were in charge of Ukraine.
Cool.
Yes.
We'll see. That's where we'll talk. Thank you.